basically, what I am saying, among other things, is that sharing our pain is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to connect. It's an opportunity to connect with Christ. It's an opportunity to connect with our spouses. It's an opportunity to connect with our brothers and our sisters. It's an opportunity to connect with others that we might serve in the world. And that is, I think, exactly what Jesus is talking about. That when you share his yoke, that you will find comfort and rest for your soul.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. Today we'd like to feature the third and final installment of a three-part series on purpose in the pain, featuring Dr. Mark Laaser. Mark had such a great insight and shared his knowledge and his talent for really opening the eyes of those struggling with sexual addiction. And this three-part series has been a powerful and moving experience for many hearing Mark's message. So here now is part 3 of Purpose in the Pain.
Today, Randy, we are on show number 4 in our series, How God Uses Pain, Suffering, Hardship, Trials, Tribulations to grow us, to draw us closer to Him, to perfect our character. And I think today we're going to try to wrap up the series with a passage of Scripture that I'll be honest, I've always been historically puzzled by, but given some of the themes that we've been talking about, it makes more and more sense to me as I get older. So I'm going to try to explain that today in ways that will be hopefully helpful to our listeners.
Well, and the passage, Mark, that you've selected is Matthew 11:28 through 30. And that passage says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light."
What I want to emphasize in this passage is the fact that Jesus is saying to us, I believe, that he was sent to earth. God's only Son, became a man so as to experience all the kinds of pain and suffering that we do. And in that sharing, I believe our pain and suffering becomes less of a burden. The theme, I think, of this verse of the show and theologically is that Jesus shares our pain. When we ourselves share pain with each other, then it tends to bring us closer together, and it tends to also make our pain, suffering, and burden lighter.
Well, and it begins with an invitation to us.
Yeah.
It begins with, "Come to me,
Yeah.
all you who are weary and burdened."
Right.
And so he knows that we are weary and
Yeah.
we are burdened. And you're right, as God sent his only Son to experience the human condition, he's been sent to ease our pain.
Yeah, that's right. So let's talk about this a little bit. That one of the first things I wanted to say today, in light of the theme of our show, this series, I think, like last week we talked about the fact that so many people get upset at times that God does not seem to answer prayer, that we've requested God to take away all of our pain or hardship or whatever it is, and we have oftentimes been disappointed, at least in our perception that he hasn't done that.
Especially in his timing
And
or
his-
lack of timing.
Well, his timing that is slower than our timing.
Yeah, we have nothing to gauge by. We only know how desperately we want the situation to go away or to be remedied.
Right.
And we think that just by asking, just by praying, that ask and it'll happen. But we have no concept of God's concept of time.
Right, and we did talk about that last week. The one thing I wanted to emphasize about that is, and we told some stories last week, including the one about our youngest son in terms of God's sense of timing in the more ultimate perspective of things being perfect. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is that if God took away our pain at times, it might prevent us from the possibilities that pain has to connect us to other people. And I'm thinking of a lot of different examples of it, but let's also start here, something that the listeners I think can relate to, and that would be this question: how many of you have ever thought that if you were, born into different families, different circumstances, you had different things go a different way in your life, that life would be better? Those people that have been, fairly profoundly abused as children in a variety of ways, I think they oftentimes think, if I had just been born into a different family, the abuse wouldn't have happened, and I would be, so much better off today.
A happier person.
Mm-hmm. A more content person, that kind of thing. So many people go through life kind of with a what-if attitude, what if something had been different? And what I think that would bring about if things were different is that it would rob us of our ability to participate in what is generally known to be the pain of all humanity. Mm-hmm. Think about where are those people, that have things so well put together that there are no problems.
Yeah,
And
there's never pain and there's never uncomfortable moments for them.
Right.
When you first started to talk about it, I thought about the life lessons that we've all learned since childhood, even the example of a hot stove burner being on.
Right. Okay.
And how it's not until the first time you ever touched a hot burner,
Right.
that you learned don't do that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that experience of pain, where it might not have brought us closer to someone unless it's the parent that it was standing nearby that then was able to teach you that lesson. But we kind of learn through experiences, and if those experiences of pain never are part of our lives, then we're missing out on more than we're gaining.
Well, part of what you're suggesting there is that there actually is a medical condition where we lose our pain sensors,
Right.
And that's probably one of the most dangerous medical conditions, because we'll allow ourselves to get into various things and create permanent injuries. And I think the same is true if you just translate that emotionally and spiritually. If our pain sensors are somehow turned off and we're not aware of the pain in our own lives, the pain in the world, then I think it makes it hard for us to participate in community and solidarity. And that's one of the themes that I wanted to get to. I think it's certainly what this scripture verse is pointing to, that we can find actually a comfort, come unto me all you who are burdened. I think we find that comfort from that burden when we share our pain. And that's kind of what I wanted to be the last major theme in this series, that one of the ways to, if not the major way, to grow from the pain and allow God to use the pain in our life a healthy way is to share it, and to share it with each other, and to share it with Christ. And that's the theme I want to return to perhaps in our second half, and maybe give some examples of that.
Okay, all
One
right.
thing I think is really important to keep in mind is that God is not like the author of pain. We brought in pain ourselves when Adam and Eve sinned. So humankind is responsible for pain and sin and suffering and death, and God is all powerful and all sovereign. He's able to turn all of our pain and suffering into just good for us, and He's able to teach us through it and mold us more into the image of His Son through that. So I think that's important to remember, that God doesn't like push pain onto us, but He's able to use the pain that we brought on ourselves to glorify Himself and to help us as well. I think that's really, really important to remember.
Well, I think that's been one of the themes of our series, that God does not, sit up in heaven and decide today who's going to get stricken with this or that. But, God does not waste pain, on the other hand, when it does happen as a result of the human condition. Well, maybe the way to get us back into, what I'm trying to say is to tell this brief story about, part of my history, and that is, as many of our listeners are well aware, all of my sexual acting out that I did in my addiction days, starting at age 11 all the way through age 37 when I finally went to treatment, that was all, for the most part, in secret. I mean, Debbie and others didn't know about it. And as we say, I was living a double life, and I was trying to handle it, manage it, and so forth on my own. And I want to pause there and just have the listeners, some of which can personally relate to this, would it not be true that if we're trying to manage something secretive, sinful, and so forth in our life all by ourselves, that is a huge burden. That's something we would describe as a weight upon our shoulders, do we not? It's the loneliness and the isolation of that creates that sense of burden. And then we're going to get back to our scripture verse here in a minute. But you get the idea of burden. So when I went to the treatment center, they had something on the very first day that I was there that was called an introduction group, or an introductory group. And I thought they were going to explain procedures to me, or they were going to, tell me about the ropes. And when I got into the room where this was supposed to take place, there were assembled all of the patients, the men who were on the treatment unit at that point, and there was about 20 of them. And I was asked to join the circle. We were all sitting in a circle, which I think is, incredibly important. And the leader started off, strangely enough, not by asking me to share something, but he started off by telling his own story. And then one by one, all of the guys in the group, all 20 of them, went around the circle, and they shared their story. It wasn't a long version of their story. It was like maybe a minute or two version of their story. And as they went around the circle, I certainly became aware that I wasn't the only one that had done some of these horrendous things. In fact, there were some guys in that group that had done some things, that I would consider, on the scale of sin, worse than some of the things I had done. And then there were some other guys who had done some things that weren't quite as awful as my history. But by the time they got to me, then they asked me if I would be willing to share a little bit about my story. And that night, March 17th, 1987, that was the very first night that I ever shared my story openly, voluntarily, with someone else. And honestly, and I was emboldened and encouraged by their own witness and example. And when I had finished sharing, I distinctly will never forget the feeling of the burden of my story being lifted. Now, instead of me carrying that burden all by myself, it's like the whole group was carrying it because everybody had a story.
As you heard the stories being shared around the circle before they reached you, did you grow in confidence? As with each story being told, and you're realizing that you are no longer alone,
Right.
And
Right.
you were so accustomed to keeping your secrets,
Right.
telling your lies. When you said earlier, as we know, people with addictive personalities are professional liars,
Right.
And the hard part about that is keeping your lies straight.
That's right. So, yeah, juggling lies,
Right.
and that takes an incredible amount of stress, and, stress is part of the burden.
Right.
As you'll hopefully hear, I'm trying to navigate us back to our verse, because that, I'll be honest, the verse from Matthew 11 has always puzzled me. When Jesus said, "Share my burden," isn't that what he says?
That's what he says.
Because my burden is light.
Come to me, all you who are weak, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Well, see, that's the part that historically I didn't understand. I mean, if you think about Christ's burden, if you just look at it on the surface, what was his mission? What was God sending him to earth to do? Take on the salvation of the world, take on the sins of the world. That's not an easy burden. But I think if we look at it in the context of God's willingness through his Son to share in all of our human condition, what Jesus is saying is that when you're willing to share your pain with me, I know what that pain is like. It's like sitting in that circle. We all have our stories of pain, and there's not anything that any of us have experienced that Christ is not intimately familiar with. We could list it, but if you think about the emotional pain and the rejection, if you think about the physical torture and pain that he went through, and most of all, particularly in terms of our show last week, in terms of answering prayer, if you think about one of his last words on the cross, that he definitely had that experience that God had utterly abandoned him, so that feeling that his own Father had left him to experience this incredibly painful torture and death. What is it that Christ could not possibly understand that any of us are going through? And I think, therefore, we worship a Savior who did all of that for us, and whatever it is that we're going through, we need to tell him about it because he completely gets it. And then I think we need to tell others about it, and we need to be in community about all of our pain, because when we share our pain, it eases the burden. The burden becomes an easier yoke to bear. And it also gives us a chance, I think, to serve. Unless we're familiar and allow ourselves to experience the pain of all humanity, how is it that we can relate to humanity when there's so many people in the world who are struggling and suffering and impoverished and hungry and all of those kinds of things? Unless we ourselves accept our own pain, trials, and suffering, how is it that we ourselves are going to relate and know how to serve other communities of people.
Those who are loyal listeners to this show, who just heard you share that, at least in my mind, brought me full circle around to the importance that you have always shared with us about accountability groups.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
And how sharing your pain and being there for accountability partners, it's a two-way street, and
Right.
it's a very powerfully supportive one.
Right. Well, that is true, and accountability is, generally thought of to help us stop certain behaviors, start other behaviors. But I think more than that, in a higher sense, accountability is for the purpose of sharing our pain, sharing our burdens, sharing our stories, sharing our life experiences. There was a guy last night in group that I hope I'm not embarrassing him if he's listening, but he was getting, for the first time that I've ever heard him, completely honest about how much depression he experiences on a daily basis. And he was so scared and frightened, I believe, by his depression that as he was sharing, tears were coming to his eyes, and he wound up sobbing. And I think what was true last night is that I don't think he had ever fully admitted to anyone how often he's in that place of deep despair. And I know he hasn't really admitted it to his wife. I don't think he'd really ever shared that with other men. He's a high-level executive, so on a daily basis he's being asked to lead a company. And so when you're leading a company, you don't generally talk about how depressed you are.
Well, you certainly don't want to be displaying vulnerability.
That's right. So what happened last night, one by one, is that a number of the men were able to share with him how often it is the case for them, historically, that they also have experienced depression and what that was like. And after about 5 or 10 minutes of his original sharing, a number of the men had just surrounded him with their common experience. And as I was watching him from across the room, actually, I could just see his posture even get lighter.
The weight being lifted.
The weight of that being lifted off of his shoulders. And at the end of that sharing time, there was even a couple of guys who kind of made a joke about something, and that whole group of men who shared about experiencing deep dark depression, a strange thing happened for them, and they were all laughing. And I'm not saying that telling jokes is the answer to this chronic depression. We certainly gave him some advice about getting some medical help with that, but I think it was another example of the power of group, the power of community, the power of men sharing each other's burdens, and that's the same for women. I think, I hear stories from Debbie all the time about how the women are able to share in group the pain of their betrayals, of their husband's sexual infidelities, and the grief and the loss and the anger and all the other things that they go through. And I know also the same dynamic operates in our wives groups, that when the wives share their pain, their burdens, their troubles, their sorrows, with other women, the pain of that gets lighter. Now, this past weekend, we had a couples workshop, and I wanted to just say for a minute that, because I know that there's a lot of couples listening to this, the original community that God intended was the community of a husband and wife in companionship. And one of the reasons that secrets and lying are so incredibly sinful is because it cuts us off. It cuts us off from fellowship with a person that should be the most important person in our life. Now, coming the other direction, I think that the couples that are going to do well are the couples in which the wife at some point is also able to share some of her pain with her husband, the burdens, the struggles, the stuff that maybe even she has felt, out of control with over the years. And you can, sometimes at the couples workshop, you can see those moments where the husband and wife are relating finally to each other as the companions that God intended, not because they're necessarily experiencing some happy thing, but they're sharing about their mutual pain. One of the things we do at the couples workshop is we do an exercise in which we have the couples more or less imagine and tell each other the story of their own childhoods. And some of those childhoods are very painful. And it's amazing to me that when couples are able to do that, that creates a level of intimacy that they hadn't experienced before. And we're seeing some transformation. So basically, what I am saying, among other things, is that sharing our pain is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to connect. It's an opportunity to connect with Christ. It's an opportunity to connect with our spouses. It's an opportunity to connect with our brothers and our sisters. It's an opportunity to connect with others that we might serve in the world. And that is, I think, exactly what Jesus is talking about. That when you share his yoke, that you will find comfort and rest for your soul.
Thank you for joining us today for the third and final installment of the three-part series featuring Dr. Mark Laaser, The Purpose in the Pain. We hope that Mark's message has been beneficial to you, and if it has helped to open your eyes to a struggle that you've been having, we invite you to visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com. There you'll find many resources available to you. You'll find our online bookstore. You'll find our podcast. We have over 400 of these available free podcasts for you. We also have all of the information and registration opportunities for our 3-day workshops. The Men's Journey Workshop we offer every month. And so if you're a man struggling with sexual addiction or unwanted sexual behaviors that you're just not able to stop, we invite you to take a look at our workshop. These workshops have been life-changing events for many, many men for many years. So check out the Men's Journey Workshop. The women can check out the Women's Journey Workshop, and the Couples Journey Workshop is available for couples as well. So check out those events, and we hope that you'll give serious consideration to coming to our center here in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and attending one of these important events. In the meantime, we thank you for joining us. We thank you for being a loyal listener of our podcast, and we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.